The legislation, adopted by 62 votes to 55, makes Hebrew the only official national language and defines the establishment of Jewish communities as being in the national interest. It also stipulates that Israel is the historic homeland of the Jewish people and adds that they have an exclusive right to national self-determination in it.
Israelis are telling the world this is going to be, in terms of geography, demography, sovereignty, Jewish, exclusive Jewish. Take it or leave it. By law, we decide what will happen on this land. We will never ever recognize anybody before us. We will never accept anybody after us.
The state is saying to its citizens, Arab citizens, you are not equal. You are maybe guests, and we are not. We are the owner of this land. We have rights, not in this land, but on this land. We are the indigenous.
Earlier this week, Parliament passed a law that could see groups critical of government policies towards the Palestinians banned from entering Israeli schools and speaking with students. Critics say the law is a blow to free speech and an attempt to weaken rights groups and NGOs, making the plight of Palestinians harder to be heard.
If we are talking about citizenship, then you have to give all citizens the same rights, regardless of their religion or political affiliations, or their social or economic background. If they give rights only to Jews, then Palestinians will be considered second-class citizens. This will be really bad.
Morgen.
Hallo.
So today we have made a law in stone. This is our country, this is our language, this is our anthem, and this is our flag. Long live the State of Israel.
Wake up and clear your brain. Time to listen to what people are saying. Government is lying again, and the media is acting insane. It's good to stay in bed and ignore the talking heads, but you can sleep when you are dead, so wake up.
Well, I have a solution. Tell people not to come to our country illegally. That's the solution. Don't come to our country illegally. Come like other people do. Come legally.
So, ihr Lieben, wir sind fast wieder zurück aus dem Urlaub, aber nur fast. Ihr habt ja zwischendurch mitbekommen, dass Stefan eine Bonusfolge zur Westworld-Staffel veröffentlicht hat und diese Woche auch eine Folge mit Thomas über die britische Monarchie. Heute gibt es eine Folge von mir, eine neue Folge Aufwachen, allerdings ohne Stefan. Das ist heute schon klar und ich habe 2 Interviewgäste, die ihr euch anhören solltet. Eine kennt ihr davon schon, Noga Tarnopolsky aus Israel. Es gibt nämlich neue Entwicklungen in Israel. Es gibt ein sogenanntes Nation-State-Law, über das ich mit Noga geredet habe und sie wollte auch unbedingt darüber reden. Und mir ist aufgefallen, dass in den deutschen Medien, zumindest in den öffentlich-rechtlichen Medien, davon nichts zu finden war. Also da wird im Grunde das israelische Grundgesetz geändert und Minderheiten zu Bürgern zweiter Klasse gemacht. Aber das kommt in Deutschland bei Oma Erna irgendwie nicht so an. Aber dazu später mehr. Zuerst rede ich mit Peter van Buren. Der ist ein US-Diplomat, der 24 Jahre Diplomat war für die Amerikaner in Japan, in China, in Hongkong, aber auch im Irak. Er hat ein grandioses Buch geschrieben, das ist schon vor, glaube ich, 6 oder 7 Jahren rausgekommen. Das heißt We Meant Well. Es heißt genau We Meant Well, How I Helped Lose the Battle for the Hearts and Minds of the Iraqi People. Also er war ein sehr desillusionierter Diplomat. Darüber reden wir auch ganz am Anfang jetzt gleich in dem Interview. Ansonsten geht es geht um die Diplomatensicht auf einen Präsidenten wie Donald Trump. Und was so ein Präsident eigentlich unterscheidet von anderen Präsidenten zuvor. Und ob der überhaupt zurechnungsfähig ist, zum Beispiel für Angela Merkel, für andere Staaten. Und wie das eigentlich ist, wenn quasi der Präsident das sagt und dass die Regierung an sich eigentlich eine andere Meinung zu dem Thema hat. Wie verhalten sich denn da eigentlich Diplomaten? Und dann reden wir auch ganz zum Schluss nochmal über dieses jetzt fast schon legendäre Treffen von Putin und Trump in Helsinki. Und ihr dürft mal raten, wie er das da eingeschätzt hat. Nicht so empörend wie die amerikanischen und auch die deutschen Medien, sondern er hatte eigentlich eine ganz einfache Erklärung, warum Trump so agiert, wie er agiert und Putin das nur ausnutzen muss. Also, jetzt kommt Peter van Buren. Es ist in Englisch. Viel Spaß. All right, we're going to talk to Peter van Buren now, who's in New York. Peter, how are you today?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Peter, you're a 24-year veteran of the State Department, and you're the author of We Meant Well, How I Helped Lose the Battle for the Hearts and Minds of the Iraqi People, and you also wrote Hooper's War, a novel of World War II Japan. Are you retired now? Is that correct?
Yes, I retired from the State Department about 6 years ago. Retired under force, if to describe it properly.
Do you want to expand on that?
Absolutely. I was in the State Department, as you mentioned, for over 2 decades, and I was remarkably mediocre as a bureaucrat. I wasn't a troublemaker. I wasn't a shooting star. I was just a pretty average person, and I was always interested in politics, but not particularly political in the sense that I found things to support and oppose in my work. Mm-hmm. I joined the State Department when Ronald Reagan was president and served through all the different administrations up through Barack Obama. So that covers quite a bit of political territory there, and I was comfortable doing my job during that time period. Things changed for me when I was assigned to our reconstruction program in Iraq during the Iraq War. I was in that country between 2009 and 2010. And during that time, I came to understand that the work I was being asked to do, spending money to fix Iraq, to promote democracy, all the different slogans we were doing, I came to understand that that work was simply fraudulent, that we were not accomplishing what we were sent there to do. And worse yet, we were actually doing harm, creating corruption inside of Iraq and driving up prices for the local people. For a variety of reasons, I decided to blow the whistle on this, and the form that I chose was to write a book to get the whole story out in one place. The State Department was not happy about that. They tried to prosecute me. They failed. They tried to fire me. They failed. And eventually we ended up negotiating my early retirement as the happiest ending that could be expected under the circumstances. Had that not happened, I may still be serving the U.S. government and the American people overseas, but that was not to be.
Okay, so I want to talk to you about credibility, international credibility of the United States.
Sure.
I mean, when you watch the news these days, when you read the newspapers, they tell you, okay, because of Trump, because of President Trump, the U.S. is not credible in the world anymore. Do you agree on that?
Well, it gets into some tricky territory about defining words like credible, but I think the best thing that what's happening now reminds me of is my own time in the government at the end of the George W. Bush administration, when clearly our credibility as diplomats was challenged by the actions of the president. At that point in time, by the end of the Bush administration, the United States had admitted to torturing people. It had admitted to kidnapping people. It admitted to running an offshore penal colony in Guantanamo and a whole series of human rights abuses, things that in another place in time would have been tried in a courtroom in Nuremberg. Mm-hmm. And yet the United States was claiming the right to do those things. Simultaneously, George Bush had launched 2 wars on false pretenses and was responsible for the deaths of millions of people while claiming that none of that was true. And lastly, he was clearly at the end of his tenure in the U.S. government. Whether he was the greatest president you ever thought of or not, his time was running out. And at that point in American diplomatic history, the United States had no credibility. Nothing we said was taken particularly seriously. And any efforts we made on a smaller scale in terms of human rights were kind of giggled at by our fellow diplomats, particularly from countries in the EU and places that had a human rights record in modern history that they could be relatively proud of. Our fellow diplomats in places like Pakistan or Egypt who had soggy human rights records kind of nodded, and they understood how the game was played, that we had to say certain things while our government did other things. A little wink, yes, yeah, welcome to our world. But in all of it, we no longer really were players at the table. I had seen that happen in minor ways at the end of each administration. Diplomats around the world are smart, and they're very aware of how the U.S. election cycles work. And they're very aware that as the president's term runs down, that he really is no longer the most powerful person in Washington in most cases, and that the United States kind of steps aside a little bit, or I should say maybe those diplomats kind of set us aside a little bit, knowing that in a few months the new guy is going to be in office and there may be a change in policy, there may be a change in personnel. Maybe I'm not going to be the person sitting across the table from them any longer. Certainly the ambassador is going to change with the new administration. Mm-hmm. I think we're seeing a version of all that now with Donald Trump. And it's still early days in this process to say where we're going with it. In other words, Trump has established a reputation as saying things different from what he does and doing things different from what he says, from saying one thing in Washington while his diplomats overseas or even his cabinet members say another thing. This has caused, I believe, and from what I understand from my former colleagues who I still speak with, a reluctance on the part of many governments to want to seriously engage with us because they're not really sure who they're talking to, or whether, in fact, the American diplomat knows what's going to be happening tomorrow in Washington. What we're waiting to see is whether, and I think it'll be another year on this. In another year, I think our diplomatic partners are either going to understand that this is the new normal in Washington, and the United States is the big fat guy in the room. We're the 500-pound gorilla in any bit of international relations, and countries have to deal with us because of that. Our military power, our economic power, our weight in international bodies means that we can't simply be ignored indefinitely. I think in a year, our diplomatic colleagues are going to try to figure out a way to do business with the United States under these new normals, or if the political winds are clear enough, they may see that Trump is on his way out, that he's unlikely to be reelected for a second term in 2020. And if that is their take on all this, it's possible that they will set the United States aside for any serious diplomacy for another 2 years. And that would be very, very damaging, not only to American interests, but perhaps world interests. Events don't stop, even though your country and my country may take a break from negotiating with one another.
So let's stick to today. Like if you were a diplomat, it's still a U.S. diplomat today, would you have trouble speaking for the White House or for your government?
I'm speaking again only as myself. I'm retired now.
Yes, of course.
But I think what I would be doing with my counterparts is, at least the counterparts that I trusted well enough to speak fairly frankly with, I think that I would be classifying things for them. In other words, the thing subject A is, I have very firm information on. It's being worked on at these levels inside the State Department. It is not of interest to the White House. I think we can work on that with assurance of what's going to happen next very solidly. Subject B is something that may or may not be as solid, but I think we can still work together on that. Subject C is something that seems to be driven directly out of the White House. I can't promise you that I have as full visibility on that the way I do on A and B, and we're going to have to work together perhaps in a more flexible way on that subject. And it's not unusual. To be very honest, particularly in countries that have parliamentary forms of government where governments can change on a moment's notice, I have encountered situations with foreign diplomats who have said something similar to that. You know, we're hearing rumors from back home that they may call for a no confidence vote. The prime minister may not be there in a month. Let's go slow on this topic and see where that comes out. Or I think we can wrap this up before the prime minister changes. We've got solid support, but we don't have a lot of time. And I think the idea of sharing with your partners, if that trust is there, can allow diplomacy and business to go forward in a different way. It is much more difficult in situations where the two sides of the table do not have that trust built up, where they may be more antagonistic in their approach, or they just simply may not know each other very well. For example, most of our American diplomats in Germany or any other country, the senior diplomats have generally served in Germany many times. They went there as a young officer, and now they've worked their way up, and the chances are that their colleagues in the German Foreign Ministry have done the same. And so in some cases, you've got senior people at the upper levels of the German Foreign Ministry and the US State Department who have known each other for 15 years, worked together, built up a relationship, and can take advantage of that relationship to get through rougher waters. It's not the case in every country and every situation, and in places where that relationship doesn't exist, it will be harder for diplomats from the United States to work with their counterparts overseas because of the, let's be generous, communications issues in Washington.
I mean, is the White House still a credible institution when it comes to international interactions? I mean, if when Merkel talks to Trump in Brussels during the NATO summit, do you think the Germans are like, all right, doesn't matter what he says, whatever, blah, 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 whatever makes the news, we're not going to take anything serious?
Well, that's a tough question to answer because you and I are only party to the public side of all these things.
Yes.
And the magic question, the magic answer depends on really what's going on. Donald Trump, for his whole career, when he was a real estate broker here, developer here in New York City, when he was on TV, whatever, has always played this larger-than-life character. There's always been this big, noisy, blustery guy up front. None of us know anything about what he's like behind the scenes, if you will. He's obviously had some success in life financially. There's a lot of buildings in New York City named after him, and he got himself elected president of the United States. I mean, my resume just doesn't look that good. And so we're going to have to give him potential credit for being a little more graceful behind the scenes maybe than in front of the cameras. I don't know that. I'm speculating here. Mm-hmm. If that's the case, then people like Prime Minister Merkel and the German Foreign Ministry will be able to understand that they need to focus on what he says to them personally and factor in the public stuff as they need to. In other words, understand that they're dealing with a guy who has a very different public and private face. We all do. You're not the same person on the air here as you are in private. But when you move up to world leadership, those differences become much more significant. I think the real question would be if, in fact, Trump is not a different person, whether in his private conversations with Merkel or anyone else, he's just as blustery and inaccurate and noisy. And if that's the case, there is a very real risk that the diplomats and other world leaders he interacts with basically ignore him and kind of take this position of, well, what can we do here? You know, as I mentioned a moment earlier, you've got a problem in that the United States is the biggest thing in the room. You can't simply say we're going to ignore the United States unilaterally, because you can't. Countries do too much business with us and receive too much business from us, the American military presence. All of these things say that you can't push the United States off to the side the way you could with a smaller country until they sort themselves out. Mm-hmm. So I think if Trump public and Trump private are the same person, it presents a very difficult situation for foreign diplomats and foreign leaders who have to figure out a way to navigate this. They have to. And if the old rules don't apply, they're going to have to figure out what the new ones are. The world events simply will not allow them to not do that across the board.
I mean, let me rephrase my question. Like, who is running the United States? Is it like, let's say Trump is the same person behind the scenes like he is in public?
Yep.
Is he running the United States? Is he the president? Or can the diplomats, can the so-called deep state, can they actually run the government?
And the answer is yes. And the answer is because they always have. You know, there's no president that has ever been able to fully control the U.S. government. The size of our government is unfathomable to people from other countries. The number of people who work for the U.S. government, the number of people who work not only directly employed by the U.S. government, but work as contractors or satellites of it. Never mind the military and the intelligence communities, which are probably as big in the United States as most governments in other countries. Mm-hmm. So this huge apparatus has never been in the control of one man or one party. It's always been a series of you're familiar with Venn diagrams, right?
Sure.
We overlap the circles. It's always been a series of overlapping circles. I would guess that Trump's circle is smaller than perhaps Obama's or George W. Bush's, but they've all been variations on that. I will certainly agree with anyone that Trump has done a poorer job of hiding the fact that he's not in control of everything than other presidents have. I think other presidents have worked very hard to give the illusion that they are singularly in control. Mm-hmm. And I think that with some exceptions, and we could talk about those that are notable, the other parts of the U.S. government have found it to their advantage to play along with that, to kind of let it look like the president's in charge of everything. Now, we saw during, for example, the Obama administration, here and there, the intelligence agencies kind of flare up a little bit around the edges. During the Bush administration, we certainly saw the ascendancy of the Pentagon and the intelligence community in terms of making big decisions that Bush seemed to kind of go along with, if you will. But at the end of the day, the reach down capability, as we call it, depends on something that Trump has been very weak on. And so this is why I say his circle is probably smaller, where the lines overlap. The idea would be that, for example, in the State Department, there are a number of people who are appointed by the president. All the ambassadors, for example, but all the senior leadership tends to be appointees of the president. And that's what gives him the ability to reach deep into the organization and cause things to happen. I was never very important. Nobody from the White House was ever going to call me, but they'd call my boss's boss's boss, and the issue that turned out to be my responsibility would kind of trickle down, and I was told what to do. If Trump has not been very good about filling a lot of those positions inside of government, particularly in the State Department, where I have most knowledge of, he seems to have allowed his the positions to sort of stay empty or sort of organically fill themselves with permanent employees. That doesn't give him that reach down capability that a president really does need to control, to grab more and more control, and to gather more information about what other parts of the government are doing. That's a big part of the president's problem, any president's problem as well, is understanding what's going on inside this massive apparatus that we call the U.S. government. Trump's inexperience, I think, has been taken advantage of. He didn't use a lot of people who understood how Washington worked in his transition to help him figure out where the touch points were, the sensitive points were. Get your guy over here, get somebody you trust over here. And I think he has paid a price for that. I think our foreign partners may sense that. And again, since our theme is credibility, I think this adds up to issues of credibility that are questions our foreign partners will be asking.
I mean, I can tell you the story like of the U.S. Embassy in Berlin. I mean, I've known people for like 6 years now. There were like I think 3 or 4 different ambassadors. I've lost your signal again. Oh,
there we go.
Back. There were like 3 or 4 different ambassadors. You're gone again.
It's the deep state has invaded our podcast.
Now you're fine.
I'll try not to touch anything at this. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
So Trump appointed Grinnell. He's the U.S. ambassador now.
Yeah.
And when I talk to my sources in the U.S. embassy, they say he's out of control. He doesn't talk to anybody. He doesn't listen to anybody. When they say, okay, you should meet with this person to, make behind the scenes talks, or you should do this in public, maybe for some PR things, he does not care. Whatever he does is on a private level. Like, like he knows certain people, and he does messages, and then he sets up an interview or like some ambassador meeting, but they have no idea. So is that the new normal?
It's not as new as you may think, and I don't know the situation as specifically in Germany as you do, and it may be exactly as you describe it, but I can describe it from my own experience at a number of other embassies overseas, and I'll add a little caveat to what you described. The chances are almost 100% that you're talking to career State Department people who exist throughout whoever's president, as I was. And I'm them too. We like things we're like dogs. We like things we don't like things to change too quickly around us. We like everything to be the way it used to be. We like systems that are predictable. And by definition, political appointees tend to introduce elements of newness and chaos into a system. Mm-hmm. And so traditionally diplomats, there's always a bit of friction between the career diplomats and political appointees, simply a systematic one, simply a way of doing business. In addition, there are elements of what's the right word? Almost jealousy, I guess. Let's pretend I'm working there in the embassy in Berlin, and I try to set the ambassador up with you for an interview because I know you to be an intelligent, fair interviewer, but the ambassador doesn't take my suggestion. He goes and interviews with someone else, your competition. Mm-hmm. Well, what am I going to be telling you on the side? That guy is no good. He's out of control. So I take those things with a grain of salt. Don't discard them, because there have been ambassadors in this administration and others that have run amok, that have made a mess out of relations, that have failed to take advantage of the huge amount of knowledge and expertise and skills in that big embassy that's underneath their office. And those ambassadors usually do a terrible job representing the United States. The smart ones find a way to represent their political positions while taking advantage of the expertise of the career employees. I'll speak of the best ambassador that I ever worked with throughout my career, who was a very political appointee. People may recall the name Howard Baker. He was Speaker of the House, a very prominent Republican. He was a defender of Richard Nixon during the Watergate capers, and he ended up his career as ambassador in Japan, where I was working. And he made it very clear from day one that he was there to implement the policies of George W. Bush. And those who had a problem with that were going to have a problem with him, because that was his job. And that's what he intended to do. At the same time, he was very willing to listen to people in the embassy, career people, first about how to do that in Japan. In other words, many of us had spent large portions of our professional career in Japan. We knew people, we knew the language, we knew the culture, we knew how you talk to people to get things done. You don't try to convince a German to change his mind the same way you convince a Japanese or a Spaniard or whatever, someone from Zimbabwe. There are different ways of approaching people. And Ambassador Baker was very, very good about saying, well, the point we're going to make is A, but listening to us about how that might be done best. In other words, like you said, maybe some private contacts over here, maybe a public statement over here. You want to talk to this guy first, but skip this guy, but make sure you get this guy. He was very, very good about that. And while he wasn't going to move on his policy positions very easily, he was willing to take advantage of the expertise in the embassy. And it sounds as if, from your description, you may have an ambassador, and I'm just basing it off of your short statement there, who isn't fully using the resources of the embassy, who's confusing the embassy's talents and skills with people not supporting his policy positions. Mm-hmm. That can be a problem too, but in many cases it's not. It's a matter of using what you've got in the building to achieve your goals and bringing people along and making them understand you're there representing the President of the United States, not the State Department. And the president wants this done. That's what we're going to figure out a way to do.
So let's say Trump wants out of NATO. And I mean,
okay, that's a big thing.
I know. I mean, that's the big topic in Europe here. I mean, we're not talking about the role of NATO itself. I mean, that is questionable after the fall of the Iron Curtain. But let's say Trump secretly, I mean, he hasn't made a public statement like,
right.
But let's say he wants out of NATO. Can the U.S. military, can the U.S. diplomats do something about it? Like, can they be like, nope, that's not gonna happen?
Well, first of all, I just think to put everybody's mind at ease, I think the chances are near zero that the United States would ever withdraw or quit or leave NATO. It's just too complex a relationship with too many things going on simultaneously. There's not like it's not like we can forget to pay our dues one month and you kick us out or something like that. It's not that easy. Second, I'm going to give Trump a little bit of the benefit of the doubt that he listens to somebody sometimes. We can all have discussions about that. I know there's people in the United States and perhaps in your country that are absolutely certain that Trump doesn't listen to anybody, that he randomly gets up every morning, sends off a few tweets, creates a crisis or two, and then goes to lunch. I'm going to say that I don't think it's quite that extreme. I don't know that he asks questions as intelligently and widely as other presidents, but the idea is, I think, the better way to approach the question that you've asked about NATO is, what is Trump looking to pick away at? Where is he looking to make changes? Not go for the all or nothing answer. Oh, hey, it's Tuesday. The Americans aren't in NATO anymore. Holy shit. It's not that. It's going to be more of are there going to be changes to the way the budget is made? Are there going to be changes in which parts of NATO the U.S. participates more or less robustly in? Are there going to be some military decisions that are made that move troops from a place to another place? That's the kind of thing that you want to watch. And those decisions can be broadly directed from the White House, but tend to be implemented at fairly low levels, and in fact can be affected by the people who are doing the implementation. Things can be done quickly, things can be done slowly, things can be questioned, things can be pushed back on. I mean, we don't want to take this everything out to the end of the argument where it becomes, a constitutional crisis where a military commander refuses to shut the lights off at a military base and close it down, and it's a movie script at that point. I mean, Tom Cruise plays the commander who refuses to, Morgan Freeman the president or something. We don't want to take every argument out that far, but realistically, if the Pentagon says, we really think that NATO Committee XYZ is a place we need to spend a lot of time, and the White House says, no, I don't think so. Those are the kind of things you want to keep an eye on, and those are the kind of places where you're going to look for people in the implementation phase willing to push back, to struggle back, to try to slow something down or speed something up as necessary. But I think we want to be careful not to always jump right to these end of the world scenarios. It's very common in the media in the United States as well to say, oh, Trump sent a tweet that doesn't sound right. He's going to do this, this, and this, and the world as we know it will come to an end to that this afternoon. It usually doesn't.
So what did you make of the Trump-Putin summit in Helsinki? Like, were you as outraged as most mainstream media in the US and in Europe?
I'm going to go more with embarrassed a little bit than outraged. I have not yet seen, I remain agnostic, perhaps we'll say skeptical on the question of whether the Russians have any influence over Donald Trump. I probably, if you forced me to tell you an answer right now, I'd say I don't think they do. I think it's mostly media fears and hypes. That said, I keep an open mind to these things, and I want to review evidence and information as it becomes available. Okay. But at the end of the day, I don't think that I was outraged. I think I was a little embarrassed. What I saw was not a Russian asset being manipulated by his intelligence handler or any of these crazy things that led American media people to talk about treason and things like that. What I saw was an amateur being taken advantage of by a professional. Trump is the amateur in that equation, in case it wasn't clear. A guy who was probably sweet-talked in private, said all the nice things. You've gone on dates, am I correct? You say nice things when you want people to act in a certain way. That's a beautiful shirt you're wearing. And I think that Donald Trump is an amateur. He doesn't understand that those things happen in international diplomacy. I think Putin stroked him and said nice things and puffed him up a little bit, and Trump went out in front of the media believing what he had been told, and it showed. And that's amateur stuff. Even at my level as a diplomat. So, when I was in Japan, they were always inviting us to go places. There's a new brewery opening. We want to invite you to go visit, Mr. Diplomat. And it's so wonderful to have you here, and what an honor. Let's take lots of pictures. If you start to believe it, you start to believe you're actually sort of, important. And, wow, these are nice people. They're really taking care of me. I owe them something in return. Well, that's amateur stuff. After your first couple of months, you start to realize that's how it's done, and that they're nice people, but you've got a job to do, and one of your jobs is to keep your head level and understand that the things that people say to you are nice words, but that doesn't change your job. You're there to represent the interests of the United States. And I think Trump got suckered in on that. He said some inappropriate things. I think, to be fair, the media does not give him a sliver of a break. Whatever he says will be interpreted in the worst possible light, and very quickly misinterpreted in a way that supports the standing narrative. I don't think Trump could have done anything right in that meeting. I think that the knives were ready to get him as soon as he announced he was going to meet with Putin. A smarter Trump would have not done the joint press conference, for example, would have met independently with the American media or taken questions in another forum. A smarter Trump would have deflected some of those questions, or given a rote answer or something like that. You saw an amateur on the world stage, and to me it was embarrassing. If I was an American diplomat, I know that when I sat down with the counterparts that I worked very closely with, Europeans, Canadians, they would be giving me a hard time. Privately.
That begs the question. Everybody starts out as a layman, as an amateur. Can you make Trump a professional?
The thing is that you have to want to learn.
Oh.
And I worry about whether Donald Trump wants to learn. The idea would be, when I first started my diplomatic career, I knew nothing. And I was very interested in advice and information and how to handle things, and I paid a lot of attention to what other people were doing, and I picked and chose among things that they did to try to make myself better. And I spent a lot of time analyzing myself. I think most of my colleagues do. You do that in your own business. I'm sure you listen to other journalists and try to do better here and there. I worry with Donald Trump that he doesn't listen to people around him, that a lot of smart people give him advice. And I can't imagine someone didn't say, look, sir, this joint press conference isn't going to be your best idea. The media is going to jump on you. If you say if you open your mouth, they're going to claim you've given in to Putin. So let's do something else. Let's do whatever. Let's do a private press conference. Let's do a walk by. Something. And I can easily imagine Donald Trump not taking that advice. And that is a little worrisome. I try to keep an open mind on things, but it worries me that he doesn't seem to learn on the job. He doesn't seem to get better. He seems to make similar mistakes over and over again. And that's never a very good sign in a journalist, in a diplomat, in the guy who fixes your car, or especially when you're talking about the President of the United States.
So we have a few minutes left. How do you interpret the timing of Mueller's indictments of those dozens of Russians who were supposedly hacking the DNC right before that summit?
If there's any truth to the concept of deep state, you've just seen proof. The idea is those the Russians that Mueller indicted. We by the way, we pronounce it Mueller here in
Mueller.
Yes.
It seems like a German name, like Müller.
Oh, I'm sure, but I'm joking with you, of course.
Okay.
The those indictments could have come any time. The information they had on the Russians, assuming it's all true or some of it's true, none of that was breaking news. They could have announced those indictments 2 weeks earlier, 2 weeks later, but by choosing to do it while Putin and Trump were meeting like that was absolutely a political move by the special prosecutor. And if you are someone who believes that the concept of the deep state is valid, that is an extraordinary piece of evidence supporting that. If you don't want to go that far with it, it is pure politics. It's nasty politics. It's what people hate about Washington, the way that folks find opportunities to stick the knife in somebody's back. And that's what Mueller did there. It was a very unfortunate thing. I would be, regardless of whether I supported what they were doing or not, I would be embarrassed to see a political gesture that crude and cheap by a man that otherwise stakes his reputation on being kind of cool and calculating as Robert Mueller does.
I mean, when we talk about deep state, we're not talking about like a Simpsons episode where Mr. Burns is meeting with a bunch of guys in
it might be
house.
Mr. Burns, we never know. It could be Mr. Burns. I would probably feel better if Mr. Burns was running things because I have great faith and he listens to Mr. Smithers' advice quite often. When we talk about deep state, what we're really talking about, in my definition, the definition that I'm working with here, is essentially the part of the U.S. government that exists, that isn't voted for, that exists independent of the Republicans and the Democrats, the people who come and go, the people that are voted for, the part of the U.S. government that remains in power whether or not there's a Republican or a Democrat. And if you look back at some of the folks who are running the intelligence community, people in the military, people in ranks at the State Department, they're familiar names. They've come out of other administrations. They've been there for a long time. They may weave in and out. Obama may have thrown some of them out. They go and they disappear into think tanks or academia for 8 years, and then whoosh, they're right back into government. You see these people from the Obama administration, they're on TV right now as commentators. But if there was a Democrat elected in 2020, they'd all be rushing right back in through the door. When I speak of the deep state, I'm talking about those entrenched interests, those people who don't come and go, who have interests beyond the partisan interests of the Republicans or the Democrats, and will use tools of government to enhance those interests, possibly as simple as their own budgets and their own survival, possibly extending to policy decisions. If Trump had an initiative on the burner when he went to see Putin, he had to take it off because there's no way he could have proposed something new in the face of those indictments. So it may have been a policy move. It may have just been the usual political nastiness of Washington.
And final question, has that deep state changed its behavior ever since Trump got into office?
I think that the actions of the deep state, and I hope people will understand how I'm defining it, have become a little more obvious. I think they've been a little less interested in hiding what they're doing, particularly the intelligence communities. The leaks that we see nearly daily in the American press, if they're true at all, and some of them are coming from extremely sensitive materials. When you're talking about, here's what we overheard on a conversation between an American person and a Russian person, and here's the words they said together, you're talking about material that is very, very, very highly classified and isn't going to be leaked by someone who's preparing to run away to Russia or go to jail for it. It's being leaked by someone who is certain they're not going to get in trouble for leaking it, and are leaking it for political purposes. So I think we're seeing the elements of the deep state and the tools that they use, particularly the way they manipulate the media, exposed more now during Trump than we did in the past. But again, it's a matter of twiddling the dial from 5 to 6 or from 4 to things like that. I don't think these are new things. I think we just can see them more clearly now.
Peter, thank you so much for your time. I really want you back on the podcast at some point in the next 2 years or something. We need to talk about Iraq and about your book.
Very much so, yes.
And about gardening.
Gardening? Sorry?
Well, when it comes to the embassy in Baghdad and the lawn there.
I see. Okay, very good. The lawn there took care of itself. We watered it with money, and that turns out to be just as effective as water or fertilizer. So a tip for your listeners, just throw money in the garden and you'll have wonderful tomatoes.
That's a nice cliffhanger. Thank you so much, Peter.
Thank you very much. Take care, please.
So, das war Peter van Buren. Ihr könnt ihm folgen auf Twitter unter @wemeantwell. Also, wir haben es nur gut gemeint. Sehr zu empfehlen, ist mal eine andere amerikanische politische Stimme auf die ganze Sache. Weiter geht's mit Noga Tarnopolsky. War schon im Podcast und wir haben gesagt, wir kehren immer wieder gerne zu ihr zurück, falls es Neuigkeiten gibt. Und diesmal geht es nicht um Gaza, es geht auch nicht um die Westbank, aber irgendwie indirekt dann wieder schon. Aber es geht um dieses neue Basic Law. Das ist immer schwer zu übersetzen, weil die Israelis haben keine Verfassung, also es ist quasi kein Verfassungszusatz, aber es ist im Grunde wie ein Verfassungsparagraph, ein Verfassungsgesetz, was da auf den Weg gebracht wurde. Es geht nämlich darum, dass Israel zum Nationalstaat des jüdischen Volkes erklärt wurde. Und da gibt es gerade einen großen Aufstand in Israel. Die rechte Regierung von Netanyahu hat das durchgeboxt und selbst alle Rechten in Israel sind damit nicht zufrieden, geschweige denn natürlich die Zentrumsparteien oder Linke und natürlich nicht die Minderheiten in Israel. Und das sind jetzt nicht nur die palästinensischen Israelis, für die dieses Gesetz natürlich gilt, sondern es gibt natürlich auch noch andere Minderheiten in Israel. Das sind nämlich die Drusen. Die Drusen sind, glaube ich, 1 oder 2% in Israel. Die haben sich vor hunderten Jahren mal vom Islam abgespalten, gelten als eigene Religionsgemeinschaft, die in der Regel in den letzten 70 Jahren dem israelischen Staat sehr, sehr treu waren und zum Beispiel auch in der Armee eine entscheidende Rolle gespielt haben. Und kurioserweise betrifft auch sie, also die Drusen, dieses neue verfassungsmäßige Gesetz in Israel, das jüdische Bürger in Israel zu Bürgern erster Klasse macht und alle anderen zu Bürger zweiter Klasse. Und wie sich das alles abspielt, das erfahren wir jetzt von Noga, und dass selbst irgendwelche alten Generäle, ja, die sonst immer sehr staatstragend auftreten, selbst die protestieren jetzt und proben den Aufstand. Und es könnte sogar sein, dass Benjamin Netanyahu natürlich neben der Gefahr, dass er jetzt irgendwann mal angeklagt wird und für seine Korruptionsaffäre und deshalb vielleicht irgendwann zurücktreten muss, kann es ihm auch passieren, dass ihm dieses neue Gesetz, dieses Nation-State-Law um die Ohren fliegt und das das Ende seiner Karriere bedeuten könnte. Darum beschäftigen wir uns damit. Bitte nicht wundern, Noga hat in einem Café ihrer Freunde gesessen. Wir haben es leider nicht anders einrichten können. Und darum ist es ein bisschen laut zwischendurch. Aber ich finde, ich habe es jetzt nochmal angehört, man versteht es doch ganz gut. Noga hat ja auch eine sehr schöne Stimme. Ich hoffe, ihr verzeiht uns das. Und ansonsten hören wir uns nach dem Ding mit Noga nochmal ganz kurz wieder.
So tell me it's cooler in Jerusalem than it's in Berlin.
It is unbelievably cold here. It's funny because with everything going on, people are talking about the weather because there's never been an August this cold, and like people who are 80 can't remember it. I'll tell you the temperature.
Are you serious?
I'm dead serious. People are like wearing a shirt and a sweater. We're having a completely. I have a friend visiting now from Switzerland, staying with me, and he thinks it's hilarious. So it says it's 25 degrees, but it's cloudy and rainy, and it's just weird. I think it's less. 19. It says 19.
Well, here it's the driest and hottest summer probably ever.
Yeah.
Like we're praying for what? For rain.
So you know what it feels like to be here normally.
Yeah. It's quite loud around you. Like, are you close to a kitchen or something?
No, it's just a cafe and it's lunchtime. Do you want me to try sitting outside or something like that?
No, I think.
Try that.
I think it would be worse outside.
I'm not sure. Let me ask them. They think it will be a different kind of noise if I'm outside.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's just go with it.
All right.
You want to start?
Sure.
All right. We're talking to Noga. Noga, how are you?
I am okay. How are you?
I'm great. We're suffering from a very hot and dry summer. Unlike you guys.
Yeah, we're suffering from an unseasonably cold August. Very weird.
So, I heard there's a lot politically going on in Israel.
Oh man.
Tell me about that basic law.
Well, the first thing I'll tell you is sort of tangential, but it's significant in its own way. It's not substantial, but it's significant. And it is that this is supposed to be Prime Minister Netanyahu's, signal piece of legislation. This is supposed to be what he's going to run on elections next year if he runs. This is the one thing he's been pushing for. He was willing to sacrifice almost anything to get this one piece of legislation passed. And he has done the worst possible rollout. I mean, it's simply indescribable, the catastrophe that the rollout of this law has been. And we're not even talking about the substance of it yet, but it was appealed to the Supreme Court within a day. It has caused a national uproar. They didn't realize what was going to happen. They've had ministers apologize and other ministers attack other ministers. And it's just, if you look at how this law was handled, by the way, it was shoved through Parliament at 3 a.m. and passed by 2 votes. So you just see a kind of mismanagement of everything. That we can now set it aside, but that's just one thing I wanted to sort of have on the table.
So tell us, before we get into the subject of the law, tell us what is the basic law in Israel?
So Israel doesn't have a written constitution. What Israel uses as a constitution is it uses as kind of legal guidelines is what's stated in the Declaration of Independence, which are basically the outlines of the state, how the state should be run. And then you have basic laws, and these laws have kind of like the force of precedence. So they're supposed to be, basic laws are more important than just your average law. They have to pass with a majority in the parliament. Parliament has 120 people. If they have to pass with more than 60. A regular law, you can just pass it with a majority of the people who are sitting there that day. And they're supposed to serve as guidelines so that if there's a tricky case in front of a judge or even a difficult kind of constitutional case at the Supreme Court, basic laws are supposed to be used as guidelines for how you're going to proceed ahead in this legal case. So it's a more stronger law.
Mm-hmm. So who came up with the idea of a nation-state law?
A lot of people used to be fighting for the authorship rights, and now kind of everyone's running away, like they had nothing to do with it. So,
I heard that it actually comes from
I need a drink.
Cheers. I heard that it came from like Livni's party from the center left in 2011. Is that true?
Not to my knowledge at all, actually.
Okay.
But Livni in 2011, I think, was maybe still in the Likud. Anyway, the idea of this kind of a law has been kind of juggled in very right-wing circles for a long time. It wasn't taken seriously for the better part of a decade, but you had some people blabbing about it. In the last few years, some people, in particular the party of Naftali Bennett, who is the education minister, and his very radical justice minister, Ayelet Shaked, they really went gangbusters with this, and they basically seem to promise that this law is going to guarantee that Israel will be a state of the Jews, or a Jewish state. They never defined it what the hell they meant, right? But it was viewed in the general Israeli public as something that would kind of strengthen the Israeli hold on the territories in the West Bank, actually outside of legal Israel. And the population of Jews who live in the West Bank are the big base for their party, for this right-wing, Jewish Home Party that Naftali Bennett runs. So they kind of championed it, and then a guy inside Netanyahu's party, Avi Dichter, took it upon himself, and this was a way of trying to make it the prime minister's law so that he could get credit. So it became one of these things that different right-wingers were fighting over to see who could use it in the next elections. And what's important is to have a look, for example, at the trajectory of this law in the last year, because it started out as a law that had such egregious writing in it that the Attorney General, who is an Orthodox Jew appointed by Netanyahu, said he would not defend this law, that he considered it an illegal law. And almost every public figure in Israel, except for the members of the government, came out against this law, including the president of the country, who's also from the Likud, including the chairman of the Jewish Agency, Natan Sharansky, also from the Likud. I mean, it's important for me to state this because it didn't develop as a left-right thing initially. It was sort of people just running a cheap electoral battle versus people who said this is ridiculous. That was sort of, and the law proposed, simply ideas that were blatantly illegal under Israeli civil law. And so had that law passed, it would have immediately caused a kind of constitutional crisis, a crisis that would have had to be addressed by the Supreme Court. Because if you pass a basic law, it's supposed to be a constitutional law that opposes other established legal precedent in the country and other basic laws, you immediately have a very serious clash. That's where we were until about a month ago.
So if there were a lot of illegal things in it, and now that are not, is it an okay basic law now?
No, it's a crap law.
Why?
Well, so what it is it's less openly, it's less blatantly illegal. What happened is that they had to water down for two reasons. One is the Attorney General said, we can't support this law. He's the Attorney General of the government. The other thing is, because they wanted it to pass as a basic law, they needed 62 out of 120. Many on the right wing did not approve of this law. In fact, members of Netanyahu's party did not vote for this law, some of them. So they needed to collect everyone they could. They needed to pull in every political favor everyone ever owed them. They needed to do everything. So the law kept getting more and more watered down so that they could pass it. And basically, I think when they passed it at 3 a.m., they thought, okay, it's a meaningless law, but we'll say we got it and we'll be able to run on this and say we're big Jews in our big Jewish state. And I think it was 3 a.m. Nobody thought it was going to pass. And so it passed. And then what you started to see was a really weird thing. Like, the people who championed this law, Dichter, Shaked, Netanyahu was saying, on the one hand, this is a defining moment in the history of Israel. And people would ask him, why? What's the difference now? And he couldn't say anything. The Minister of Justice, Ayelet Shaked, said, well, it's so watered down. Whatever's left of it, it just reinforces that this is a Jewish state. So you had all of people who championed it all of a sudden saying, well, this is like nothing. It's like a symbol. And they killed themselves for a year to get it passed. But the problem is they had watered down those sections that would have prevented them from getting it passed. So sections, for example, that would have allowed somebody to declare that their neighborhood or their settlement, their community was only for Jews or something like that. So that all of that stuff was removed from the law because they wouldn't have gotten the votes for it. But they did leave in pretty crappy stuff, which one or two parts may be blatantly illegal, I don't know yet, but they left in enough stuff that these people who were doubting didn't pay that much attention to, and so they could get the law passed. But citizens of Israel who feel offended by those sections that did pass blew up. And so the sections that passed that are very problematic, in particular, are two sections. One says that the Arabic language is no longer an official language of the State of Israel. Until today, it has always been an official language alongside Hebrew. And as a result of this law, it was no longer an official language, and it became a language with, and I quote, a special status.
Nice.
No one can define what that means. No one knows what it means, and the law doesn't define it. The other very problematic piece of this legislation is also very vague. And so it says something like that the state sees it as an interest of the state to encourage the establishment of Jewish communities.
Yeah, it says Jewish settlements are a national value and shall be promoted.
Right, so there you go. So what does it mean? It means kind of nothing, because in the State of Israel, 80% of the population is Jewish. Especially among smaller communities, many of them are completely Jewish. So you think, at least the people who passed the law think, who cares? It just sounds nice. But because they worded it so vaguely, people who live in not Jewish communities, in other words, the city of Jerusalem, where we're talking right now, that is a very mixed city, think, what the hell? Right? How do you define now what that law defines as a priority of the state is not itself a defined entity. So the opponents of the law say this, you're saying to the guys who pass it, they say, you're saying it's nothing, but I'm telling you this could be used to harm me. I'm an Arab, I'm a Muslim citizen of Israel, I'm a doctor, I contribute to society, I pay my taxes, and if I want to live in X place, they will now be able to tell me, no, you can't, because we get financial advantages from the state because we're a Jewish community, and if you move in, we won't. So that is the fear. Now, some lawyers have said, well, that could never happen because there are other laws that prevent this sort of discrimination. But then the other side goes back and says, no way, this is considered a basic law, so this will be predominant. So that's how the fight started. First of all, everyone was shocked. I have to tell you again, I think even the people who wanted this law to pass didn't think it would, and so they were unprepared, and they were willing to sacrifice almost anything to get it through. The next day, people woke up. And then what has turned into, I think, pretty much an existential crisis here that is still developing and really out of control. And I think the harm caused by this law it seems to me right now not yet possible to define, has to do actually with the clause of the Arabic language alongside this clause about Jewish communities. So among the Arabs who live in Israel, there's a minority who belong to a religion that's called Druze. Not Muslims and not Jews. But these are extremely patriotic citizens of the state. They have a much greater impact in Israel than their numbers would suggest. They are renowned for their loyalty. They serve in the army. There are generals. The military advisor to the president was until a few months ago a Druze general. You have Druze everywhere. Druze doctors, Druze, and they feel themselves 1,000% Israeli. They have no other identity. They're Druze Israelis. And I think specifically because they're so Israeli and because they're so loyal to the state, they felt that they were stabbed in the heart by this law because they're not Jews. And this is a law about Jews. And so initially the government tried to kind of fob them off, saying, oh, this doesn't affect you in any way. This is just about a national definition. And they said, no way. The pain felt in this community is something that clearly the government did not take into account. Let me just say that the government had plenty of warnings. It's not like Naftali Bennett woke up the day after this law passed and said, oh my God, I've just discovered that this law wounds my Druze brothers in arms. This was not the intention of the government. We will fix it. And then you had the Minister of Finance say, oh, we passed this too quickly. We didn't realize, like as if they're kids and they didn't realize that if they ate the cookies, then tomorrow there are no cookies. But it's absolutely not true. They were working on this law for more than a year, this version of the law. They received warnings throughout this time, both from Druze leaders and from the political opposition, who said to them, what you're doing to the Druze is unforgivable. Forget Christians living in Israel, forget Muslims living in Israel, who are the majority minority. So now the situation is that the Prime Minister feels he can't back down, because this is his big achievement, but you know, he held his, I think, 4th or 5th emergency meeting with Druze leaders last night, and his goal was to get them to cancel a massive rally against this law that's planned for Tel Aviv in 2 nights, on Saturday night. And the Druze leaders walked out of there and they did not cancel the rally. So now, you know, there's a feeling of maybe splintering in the Druze community. Some of the more establishment leaders have said that they accept that the Prime Minister wants to fix it and they'll give him some time. But the younger ones, or the more angry ones, or those who don't identify with the Prime Minister's politics are saying, no way, this is unacceptable, we want this law cancelled. So that's where we are.
So, real quick, just to understand, like, you said that Israel's president, Mr. Rivlin, he's against the law. Can the president do something about that law now? Like, after it passes in the parliament, can he say, okay, I'm not going to sign it? Does he have to sign it or something?
So, I don't know if you're just asking out of curiosity or if you're asking because you know what happened about this question.
I don't.
But, so officially, the president is a figurehead leader, right? The Prime Minister is the head of government in Israel, right. And the president is head of state, but he has, in general, just emergency powers or that kind of thing. Rivlin and Netanyahu come from the same party, but they've hated each other for a very, very, very long time. Rivlin happens to be the son. His father was a professor of Arabic literature and one of the greatest translators of Arabic texts into Hebrew. And Rivlin grew up in an Arabic-speaking home in Jerusalem. And Rivlin publicly opposed this law from the beginning. And then the law passed. And a Bedouin Israeli, so another Arabic-speaking group of Israeli citizens met with him a few days ago, and when they walked out, one of the leaders said that he asked the president, your question, are you going to sign this law? Officially, the president has to sign in any law passed by the parliament. It's an official thing. I think a law is a law even if he doesn't, but that's the way it's done. So this guy said, are you going to sign this law that you oppose so much? And Rivlin smiled and answered him, maybe I'll sign in Arabic. So now that Arabic is not our official language, right? So he was playing with it. I truly don't know what's going to happen, and I feel like this could go still in any direction. It's really a story that's developing, and it has caused, at least for the first time that I have any memory of, it has caused such a crisis within the army, which you have to remember, a popular army, everyone is drafted. Netanyahu, until last night, hadn't said a word. You know, like his country's bleeding and he hadn't said a word. And then yesterday he announced what I call a non-plan. He announced a 4-point plan to create a plan to help the Jews feel better sometime in the fall. And instead, you had the chief of staff of the army, who had nothing to do with this whole thing. He was forced to make a statement to the nation and to the soldiers 2 days ago because there was a feeling the officers, both Druze and Jews, are so upset. There have been, I think every single living former chief of police, every living former chief of the army, chief of staff of the army, everyone from colonel to, lieutenant general, You have hundreds of these people signing saying you can't do this to us. This is not how we operate. The chief of staff published an official, like an order, right? That's almost strange because he almost describes the army as extraterritorial. He basically says, in this people's army, we will continue to treat everyone exactly the same. We will. Everything right now is just weird.
So let's talk about the official language real quick. Until now, there was Hebrew and Arabic as official languages, and now Arabic got demoted. Is that right?
Arabic got demoted, and now it's like our special friend. It's no longer official.
But why? Why does it have to be changed?
I think it's a cheap shot for, not even for the right-wing public in Israel. I think for the extremist base who votes in the primaries of the Jewish Home Party and some sectors of the Likud, growing sectors of the Likud, that are just like the US Tea Party that eventually took over the Republican Party. These are extremists and vicious, and for them, being able to dance over the fact that Arabic is no longer an official language without thinking about any of the ramifications and not caring, that was considered a big victory. You can ask why. I think it's important to ask an even bigger question. Why the hell does Israel need a law that says that the flag is its flag and that its national anthem is its anthem? Israel has been defined as a state for the Jews from the UN partition plan in 1947. Why does Israel need a law saying it's a Jewish state, right? You can ask why, a very difficult and profound why, about almost every aspect of this law. And I think, unfortunately, the people who asked this question ahead of time, the rest of the public wasn't paying attention because no one's paying attention to the Knesset. No one thought it would pass. And then it passed, and all of a sudden people who you work with and who you know are crying and saying, I feel like this country stabbed me in the heart, and so everyone is now shocked. It's that kind of a process.
I mean, I remember talking to Yigal Palmore 4 years ago, and he was the spokesman of the foreign ministry, and I was asking, like, is it true that some people in your country want to actually have like a Jewish state law, what we're talking about now? And he was like, no, there's no need. Like, we're not Iran. Iran calls itself Islamic Republic, but we do know that it's not a republic, it's not a democracy. So why would we do it? So he gave
a very intelligent guy.
Yeah, he gave us all the arguments against this law now.
There's another irony, by the way. The main population that this was passed for, this like very extremist, hardcore Tea Party right wing, many of them live in the territories, and many of them represent the interests of Israel's ongoing occupation of the territories. But of course, this law does not apply in the territories. Israeli law does not apply in occupied territories because this is a civil law, and those territories are under military occupation, so the military law applies. So it's filled with ironies. This entire misconceived, political, populist piece of legislation passed, and it has only caused harm. It has only caused harm.
One of the basic principles of the law says, and I'm quoting, the land of Israel is an historical homeland of the Jewish people. I mean, when it says the land of Israel, does it mean something different than the state of Israel? Because I'm thinking about, land of Israel as in Judea, what is the West Bank now? Do they mean the West Bank?
I mean, if you want to go crazy, you can say all the way to Iraq, right? Look, I don't know what it means. I don't think that's the issue here, because it doesn't define in this law that the whole land of Israel, even if it's the historic homeland of the Jewish people, it doesn't define that the Jewish state has to occupy the entire land of Israel. It just says this piece of land is the historic homeland of the Jewish people.
Right.
Okay? It doesn't define within that any sort of the frontiers of a state. So, I think it's easy to say this huge province here, this is a historic homeland of the Jewish people, and today the state of Israel has this part of it. Mm-hmm. That's not, in my mind, I mean, I think this whole law is written in a way that parts of it are just laughable. They look like the law you would write as a 14-year-old. You know, this is how you think a law should sound language. But the problems are where it came very close enough to definition to be offensive, but they pulled back so they could pass it, but it remained bad enough that it harms. It causes measurable harm to real people. And then there's the question of the Arabic language, which is deeply, deeply offensive to many people, including to the president of the state.
Another point I was kind of critical is it says the right to self-determination in Israel is unique to the Jewish people.
So that's a mistranslation. What it says is the right to national self-determination. In other words,
what does that mean?
The definition says it means that if you are a Muslim citizen of Israel, you don't have the right to claim that this will be that you are going to develop your own national right. But I have to explain here.
Yeah.
First of all, it's not what did you call
self-determination?
It's not self-determination in the individual sense. It's national self-determination. And the problem is the Hebrew word is le'om. And it's a word that means people, like the Cherokee people. Okay? Like when you talk to Indian, Native American tribes in North America, they will say, I am the chief of the Cherokee Nation. So nation, the translation, which for some reason in your text that word is missing, but the word nation that should be in your text is a translation of the Hebrew word le'om, which means nation in the Cherokee sense, and not in the sense that the Irish Republic is a nation. And so what that line says, is that only Jews will be able to say, this is the land of my people. And let's say if you're a Muslim, you can't say, this will be the state of my people in the sense of this being a Muslim nation.
Got it.
I have many things to say about this. I think it is an entirely frivolous phrase that should not be part of any law, because I think if you're a sovereign state, you have defined yourself as a sovereign state, and there's absolutely no need to then start differentiating among different people who live among you in such an impossible to define area such as national self-determination. Let's say that I'm a Muslim in the sense of being part of the Muslim world, a Muslim nation, and I want to celebrate one of my festivities with a big parade on the street, right? Eid al-Fitr. Does this law now mean I can't do it? So the people who passed the law said, what are you talking about? Of course not. But the people who have these feelings think, oh yeah, anyone could abuse this law and force me to oppress my own wish to express myself, because they'll say this is an act of national self-determination. You see what a mess it is?
Yeah. And another point is about Jerusalem. It says Jerusalem is the complete and united capital of Israel. So no chance for Palestinians to share Jerusalem.
Well, except notice that it doesn't define how it's defining Jerusalem.
Well,
everything about this law has been left, again, so vague that it could pass at 3 a.m, but also so vague that it could truly be abused, and it could be used to harm and oppress people. The question of Jerusalem is exactly that same one. Exactly. They don't define what they mean about Jerusalem. So are they still happy to have Abu Dis, a Jerusalem neighborhood, become the capital of a Palestinian state? Who the hell knows? It's a dangerous law.
So let's talk about the implications, or let's talk some more about the implications for the minorities. I mean, a lot of Palestinians, prominent Palestinians, were talking about that it contains elements of apartheid or an apartheid system. Do you agree with that? And if so, what kind of elements are that?
Look, a lot of people are calling it an apartheid law, and I understand why they're doing it, and that is because of the first clause we talked about that said that it's a national priority. Jewish settlement is a priority for the state of Israel, or something like that, and they're saying, well, what about our settlements, right? So I don't know if I'd say it's apartheid, but I would say, I think it's an illegal clause in the law. We don't know yet the implications because nobody knows how such a vague and poorly worded law could be applied. It has already been appealed to the Supreme Court, so nobody knows how the court will rule. The court can rule that parts of the law are legal and parts are not legal. And I don't think there's going to be any application of this law until the Supreme Court has ruled. But meanwhile, there's a whole other thing happening, which is in Netanyahu's desperate attempt to cancel this massive rally against the law on Saturday, he issued 4 principles that are supposed to be the basis of this happened just a few hours ago, late last night. These 4 principles are supposed to be the basis of some plan that this committee, headed by the Prime Minister, will come up with sometime in the autumn. And if these 4 principles come into being, this law would be much more illegal, clearly illegal, than how it is now. So the Prime Minister has basically attempted to quell the anger of the Druze by adding or saying he wants to add to the law. Remember, this law has to be voted on by 62 out of 120. So he says that his intention is to pass some kind of amendment to the law, which would say that anyone who serves in the army will be considered equal to the Jews who are the nation of the state, or something like that. The problem is that if you put something like that into words, there are many people here who don't serve in the army, right? So let's say the ultra-Orthodox Jews who don't serve in the army, they won't complain because they say they're covered by the fact that they're Jews, even those who don't recognize the state of Israel. But what if I am, like I said to you before, what if I'm a Muslim doctor who works at Hadassah Hospital? I cure terror victims, okay? I work in trauma surgery, I pay my taxes, I send my children to school. I'm a model citizen in every way, but I didn't serve in the army, right? So this law, with the amendment that the Prime Minister proposed last night, that would be explicitly a law that contravenes basic principles of the state set out in the Declaration of Independence. And so this law could actually be nixed by the Supreme Court. If the government passes this thing that's supposed to fix it, the Supreme Court is likely to declare it immediately legal. And I want to just quote, there's a very good analyst of Israeli politics called Nadav Eyal, who posted very late last night that he thinks the government proposed this on purpose because they'll make the law worse, the Supreme Court will annul it, and then they can wash their hands and say, listen, we did what we could, but these leftist, liberal enemies of the people on the court, they canceled our beautiful law on us. And he thinks that there may even have been intentionality there.
So, I mean, it's kind of extraordinary to think of a military service as a way of qualifying to become a first-class citizen in a country.
It's explicitly illegal. It's crazy. It's illegal. And for example, let's say you're a Christian woman, right?
Right.
And in the Christian community, some men serve in the army. Very, very few women do. So what? You're not going to have the same rights as like some dude down the street from you who did decide to serve in the army? Christians have an option. I mean, the whole thing is misconceived and in addition incompetently handled.
So can Bibi's government do something now that the law has passed that they couldn't do before?
No. Yes. Let me correct myself. Yeah. They cannot do anything substantial, but among their base, they can campaign as some kind of Jewish heroes of a very narrow base, saying, we did it. Now you know you're the country of the Jews, right? And meanwhile, the guy sitting on the beach in Herzliya is saying, no one needs to tell me this is a Jewish country. What the hell are you talking about? That's the clash. And the primary elections in these parties have become, I spoke to General Amal Assad, who is one of the organizers of this big rally Saturday night. He's a guy with a 30-year trajectory in the army, okay? And he said to me, it's going to fail because there's not one Jew in this country who hasn't stood at some time next to the grave of a Druze soldier who died, and they're not going to stand for it. And I thought that was an important point to make. And then as all of these Jewish university presidents, academics, chiefs of all of the security service have joined in, I kept thinking about what he had said to me. I don't know.
So
I think we're seeing cynical politics at its worst. What he said is that this government has addressed itself to cheap primary voters and no longer addresses itself to the country.
So when is the next election?
Well, it could come at any minute since we have a parliamentary system. If Bibi at any point loses a non-confidence vote, then there would be elections. At the moment, elections are scheduled for the second part of 2019, but the way people are acting, you get the sense they think they might be coming earlier than that.
Oh my! And why does Bibi want to want to avoid that rally in Tel Aviv on Saturday? What's wrong with rallies?
Well, if there are rallies that declare their love for him, I'm sure he would be thrilled. But Netanyahu has built a significant part of his career by referring to himself as, in Hebrew you call it Mar Bitachon, Mr. Security. And he's been prime minister for a very long time, the better part of a decade. And he has convinced many Israelis that only he is Mr. Security. Only he can bring security. He's tough. He's manly. He knows what needs to protect Israel. And what he's scared of is what I saw last night on TV, which is Yuval Diskin, a former head of the Israeli security services, the Shin Bet, saying what happened this week, this law, is much more dangerous to the future of the state than Iran or the Palestinians or anything else. And so what I think the reason Netanyahu wants at almost any cost to avoid the rally, now he's failed. The rally, I had to restart Skype.
No problem. So I think we got cut off when you were talking about the rally and why Bibi is not a fan of that rally.
Yeah, Mr. Security does not want the look of being opposed by a thick line of blue and green uniforms saying, you're destroying our country. And that's what's going to happen Saturday night. And for him, this is a sort of a nightmare because when he's on, the principal way Netanyahu communicates with the people of Israel is through short video clips that he posts on Facebook. I'm not joking. And it's one thing for him to say, after every time the police recommend that he be indicted or whatever, he says, I'm the only one who can look after security, I'm this and that. That's one thing. And I have to say, worked not bad for him. But, he tends to refer to everyone who disagrees with him as an enemy of the people. More and more he does this. The media, the lefties. When the Druze first started protesting against this law, he started referring to the lefty critics of this law. And the Druze are not a population who normally vote left at all. Okay, so all of this, so far so good. But he is not going to be able to convince your average Israeli who watches the news that every single colonel, major, every single former chief of staff of the army, every single former director of the secret services, every head of the Mossad alive, every police chief, every university, he's not going to be able to convince them that they're all haters of Israel. And that's his usual line. So I think this protest is going to be a challenge for him.
So what a lot of heads of governments do when they're in crisis, they either start a war or attack some things. Has the Israeli army did they get involved in some stuff over the last couple of days?
No, and Netanyahu's hands are kind of tied right now. I mean, the situation up on the northern border with Syria is too volatile for him to play around. So the army has had involvement, but very precise against specific drones against a Syrian plane in the last few weeks before the law was passed. So this is not something you can play around with. The situation in Gaza on the south, similarly, is not one you can play with, and it's an ongoing volatile situation. So what you're left with is Iran. But at this moment, President Trump of the United States is playing with the Iranian issue. And Netanyahu is, at the end of the day, not the leader of a superpower. He can't play. I mean, if Putin, who I'm not sure is the head of a superpower, but if Putin and Trump are the guys playing on the stage what we're going to do to Iran, I mean, Netanyahu, even when there was, let's say, it seems to me, a clearer, more evident danger, he did not send his Air Force against Iran. It's not evident what he could do. But now, I mean, I think what does come into play probably is the fact that he faces an almost certain indictment in the next few months. And I think that is stressing him. And I think he's doing some political mistakes like this law, in part to protect himself vis-a-vis his own public in the light of what's going to happen. So he wants to be able to say the police, they're all haters of Israel, that's why they're indicting me, or whatever. But this can only go so far. And this law has been a screw-up because it's kind of screwed up his own image, Like, there's one aspect which clearly they didn't take into account, and it's that they were going to get a letter from 100 lieutenant colonels and up saying this law is destroying the country. That they didn't expect.
So, about the indictment, I mean, this corruption case has been going on for almost years. When is it ever gonna? When are there consequences? I mean, is there an indictment coming any time now? Like, why does it take so long?
By consequences, you mean jail, or by consequences, you mean an actual indictment, not just a police recommendation?
An actual indictment.
Look, first of all, the investigation went on for not much more than a year, and I know it feels like forever, and that the police came to a conclusion several months ago, but it's not that long. It should take a long time to investigate a democratically elected head of state. It shouldn't be something anyone does lightly. It's not like investigating your neighbor for, using his basement to run a cocaine ring. You're investigating someone who was chosen by his people to hold a certain post, and what you're investigating could get him out of that post, so you have to be very careful. I don't have a problem that the investigation took as long as it took, but now there may be political considerations taking place in how long it's taking the Attorney General to review the police recommendations about an indictment. And so this should come any minute. The general assumption is that the Attorney General will approve the police recommendations and Netanyahu will be indicted. And there has never been an Israeli prime minister, there's never been an Israeli minister of any kind who stayed in power after being indicted, ever. So Netanyahu is playing on a lot of different fields right now, right? He's planning for the next elections, but meanwhile he has to get to the next elections. He's trying to create a basis, a political basis, so that if he is indicted, he'll still be able to stay in power and say, I'm just indicted, I'm not a convicted criminal. But too many people don't like him. I mean, he was elected with 30 seats out of 120 in the Knesset, so let's not exaggerate the guy's popularity. And he, politics is a snake pit, and there are a lot of people who want to be the next prime minister. So if he's indicted, he will have a very, very severe problem. And that could come in a month. It could also come in a year, but it could come in a month.
All right. Let's get to the end. One last question. Are you going to join the rally on Saturday?
I am.
As a private...
That was an easy question to answer you.
As a private citizen, or are you going to cover it?
I'm doing both. It's interesting, your question. I, by temperament, am not someone who really goes to rallies. I haven't been to a rally in a long time. I, for example, feel that gay men should have the same state-subsidized right to surrogacy in the state of Israel as any other citizen. But I didn't go to that rally, unlike 80,000 other people. Not because I don't support it, just because I'm not an activist type. I've never belonged to a political party. There's things that are important, there's things that aren't. I don't associate that way in general. But this issue seems to me just too huge. And so there are many reasons I want to be there. I want to be there to show my presence as a citizen because I think this is an illegal and dangerous law. I want to be there because I think it's a historic moment and I want to be a witness to that. And I want to be there as a journalist and be able to cover it and write for a paper what happened, what the feeling was like, what people said.
All right. Noga, thanks so much for your time. I hope we can join you at this lovely cafe of yours in a month or so, because Tyler and me are planning on coming back to Israel at the end of August, beginning of September.
I'd love that. That would be great.
Thanks for your time.
See you soon. Ciao. Bye-bye.
So, das Gespräch habe ich vormittags geführt mit Noga und dann hat sie sich am frühen Abend nochmal gemeldet und meinte so, Tilo, wir müssen nochmal reden. Es hat sich im Laufe des Tages doch noch was entwickelt. Und so ging's weiter.
So what happened today?
Well, today things have gotten, I would say, more severe. At the end of the day, the Prime Minister announced he's cancelling a trip that has been anticipated for months, like since last September, an important trip to meet something like 6 South American presidents at a summit in Colombia. And I know this from people in South America. They're very shocked and offended. He canceled hours before leaving. And the reason the Prime Minister gave is because there is an upcoming deal, maybe something to fix the violent situation in Gaza. Some sort of UN-sponsored. But I suspect we're talking about something else. And I think that the Prime Minister is extremely stressed about this big demonstration planned for Saturday. And despite the fact that he announced yesterday that he had come up with a plan, in fact, there is no plan. And what he presented as a plan has been rejected by all of the different groups of Druze leadership, because it's not one thing. And despite him saying he has a plan, today he had a new meeting with Druze leaders in his office. And this meeting blew up, literally with the Prime Minister storming out. Oh. And this is where things are starting to get ugly.
He stormed out of his own office.
Well, that was the first report we got. Yeah, that he just they were in a meeting room and he just got up and stormed out. And what came out of the Prime Minister's office is that a retired general of the Israeli army had said to him, "You're creating an apartheid state." And he said, "You're not going to insult the state of Israel and the office of the Prime Minister in this way," and stomped out. But now I'm asking myself if this isn't actually a smear that came out of the Prime Minister's office, because I have heard a private recording from a different IDF general who was in that meeting, and he described a very different thing. He described the Prime Minister trying to split up among the groups of the Druze, demanding to speak only to the spiritual leaders, like the sheikhs, who, by their nature are more establishment types and less fighters, and the group said, we're not splitting up, and you're not going to go in and speak with the sheikhs without the generals. And the sheikhs said this, and everyone said this. And so in this leaked recording that I got, not from inside the meeting, from a guy who had just walked out, the impression is that this is really blowing up in the face of the Prime Minister. Haaretz has published, a source in the office of the Prime Minister just talking about how stressed they are about this big demo coming up. So that's where we're at, I would say. The Prime Minister is looking at a long line of decorated military officers, Druze and Jews, saying to him no.
That is a big thing in Israel, right? I mean, do generals usually say no to their prime minister?
Of course not. These are all retired generals. These are people who can allow themselves to do what they're doing because they're retired, but it's still remarkable. The homogeneity of it is remarkable. And it's worth saying, Netanyahu likes calling himself Mr. Security. I said it before, but this is really bad for him. This is really bad for how he supposed to see him. So I think we're in for a really interesting next 48 hours or so.
Do you think that will spark people to go to the demonstration even more now on Saturday?
At the moment, that's what it looks like. I mean, I'm not in the prophecy business, and a lot of things can change, and who knows? But at the moment, it looks to me like it's going to be a big deal. Yeah.
Well, we'll watch it. It's probably going to be on every TV station in Israel, right?
I suspect so. Yeah. Yeah.
How does the non-Arab opposition deal with it? Like the left bloc?
Well, the left bloc opposed this law from the very beginning. The left bloc are kind of obvious. The Druze are not a left-wing group, so that's another surprising thing here. But the left, everyone, they feel like they have the left in their back pockets, and they pretty much do, because the left are the ones who oppose it. Not just the left. I would say center to left and some small parts of the right. Netanyahu managed to pass this bill because he got the support of the religious parties who really didn't care about this, but wanted their own bill against their guys being drafted to the army passed. And in a different leaked recording that came out a day or two ago, you heard their top representative, a minister from this ultra-Orthodox religious party, saying, "Why did we vote for this bill? We knew it was a bad bill. We just wanted our draft bill to go through." I mean, just filth, the most cynical kind of cheap leadership. So, yeah, I mean, I think people are... It seems somehow that this law touched an open nerve that we hadn't perceived here before.
Well, let's see what happens in the next coming weeks. I mean, if he cancels an important trip, that must be important.
That's what I think.
All right.
Yeah.
Thanks, Noga, for the update.
Thanks for calling back. Bye-bye.
We'll see you in Jerusalem. So, das war's für heute. Ihr habt gehört, Tyler und ich planen wahrscheinlich Ende August bzw. Anfang September nach Israel zu reisen, nicht gehen. Nicht zu ziehen. Wir reisen wieder nach Israel und wollen diesmal auch nach Gaza und dokumentieren, wie es in Gaza sich so leben lässt. Ob es wirklich ein Freiluftgefängnis ist. Wir wollen auch nochmal in die Westbank und natürlich auch mit vielen hoffentlich prominenten Politikern und Politikerinnen aller Couleur in Israel sprechen. Aber dazu dann mehr, wenn wir wieder regulär zurück sind. Das wird nächste Woche sein. Stefan und ich wissen noch nicht ganz genau wann, weil am Montag hat meine Mama Geburtstag, am Dienstag ist Einschulung von Stefans Tochter, glaube ich. Es sieht eher nach Mittwoch aus. Und ja, habt ein schönes Wochenende. Macht's gut. Für Deutschland.
Für Deutschland.
Für Deutschland!